You think you're alone when you walk home at night. The street is quiet, the air cold, and the only sound is the echo of your own footsteps. But what if one of those footsteps isn't yours? What if, right now, something is crouched behind the bushes, watching, matching your pace, waiting for the moment you turn your back? Every story you're about to hear actually happened. These are not urban legends. These are real people who looked into the dark and saw something staring back. A child who heard his mother's voice calling from the basement. A hiker who met a stranger wearing his best friend's jacket. A babysitter who realized her little boy's imaginary friend wasn't imaginary at all. Welcome to Midnight Hauntings, where the shadows speak, and the truth is always more terrifying than fiction. Subscribe if you dare to keep listening, because once you hear these stories, you'll never trust what you see or what you hear in the dark again. It started on one of those nights that feel too quiet to be real. The kind where the silence presses against your ears and every sound feels out of place. I was 15, walking to my girlfriend Casey's house. We lived in one of those calm, upper-class neighborhoods that looked like nothing bad could ever happen there. The streets were lined with trimmed bushes and the glow of porch lights, the kind of scene parents imagine when they tell you it's safe outside. I didn't have a curfew, and Casey only lived 2 blocks away. I liked walking there at night. The air was cool. The world felt mine. That night, though, something was off.
Mom.
The first sound was small, almost innocent, the rustle of a bush behind me. I didn't stop walking. I just turned my head and looked back over my shoulder. Nothing, just the empty street stretching behind me. But my pace quickened. A minute later came the sharp crack of a twig. This time I stopped. The sound of my heartbeat filled the space that silence left behind. The bushes lining the sidewalk looked normal, but I could feel eyes in that darkness. I took another step, then another. My footsteps began to sound too loud, like I was walking for both of us. By the time I turned onto Casey's block, I was practically speed walking. I could already see the faint glow from her bedroom window. Then came another noise, footsteps, quick and light, matching mine. I spun around. Nothing. The air was still, my breath was the only thing moving. I pulled out my phone and called Casey. My voice trembled when I told her I kept hearing someone behind me. She laughed nervously, told me to hurry up. I walked up her driveway, circled around the hedge, and looked up. She was standing in her window, waving. For a second, I felt safe again. Then she stopped waving. Her face dropped. "Who's that behind you?" she said, her voice suddenly flat. I turned, and there, he was a grown man, crouched low, barely 10 feet away. His face was hidden by the shadows, but I could see his teeth glinting as he moved. I screamed and ran for the front door, pounding it with my fists. Before Casey's mum could open it, the man's arm wrapped around my neck. I felt his breath on my ear as he tried to drag me backward. Then, just as fast, he let go and ran into the dark. The door flew open and Casey's mum pulled me inside, slamming it shut behind me. I collapsed, shaking, my throat burning. They called the police, but he was gone. He had been watching me for blocks, and none of the neighbors had seen a thing. That night I slept on their couch, the sound of every creak and whispering wind, reminding me that the quietest streets hide the loudest nightmares. Some nights, I still hear footsteps when I walk alone. The second story happened years later, in another house that looked safe from the outside. It was one of those stormy nights that make you want to curl up and listen to the rain. My parents were watching TV in the living room, my sister upstairs playing games, and I was in my room, half lost in the noise of thunder. I always liked storms. They made me feel cocooned, hidden, but this storm didn't stay outside. The bang on my window was so violent I thought a tree branch had hit it. I turned to look, but what I saw froze me. A man's face, blurred by rain, was pressed against the glass. He was shouting, but the roar of the storm drowned his words. I cracked the window open just enough to hear him scream, "Help me, please, I'm hurt!" The water was coming down so hard I couldn't see his body, just his eyes and the white flash of his teeth. I yelled for him to go around to the front door. Then I shut the window and ran to tell my dad. We barely made it to the living room when the pounding began on the front door, 3 heavy, desperate knocks, followed by that same voice begging to be let in. My dad reached for the doorknob, but I stopped him. Something about it didn't feel right. His eyes met mine and he hesitated. That's when the phone rang.
Come down here.
On the TV, the caller ID flashed our neighbor's name. My dad answered, and I'll never forget his face as he listened. He said, "No, no way," and hung up. Then he told us to stay away from the door. I watched as he went to the window, just enough to peek through the curtain. His shoulders stiffened. He whispered that the man outside wasn't hurt, he was holding something. A long, sharp tool, maybe an axe. My dad shouted through the door for him to leave before the cops got there. The man stopped pounding, but didn't move. The only sound was the rain slapping the porch roof. Then, finally, the shadow disappeared from the peephole. The police found him hours later, wandering the neighborhood. He wasn't a lost traveler or a hurt neighbor. He was a homeless man with a history of breaking into houses during storms, using the same lines screaming for help. In his hand, when they found him, was a hatchet. It made the newspaper a few days later. My dad kept the clipping, maybe as a reminder that danger doesn't always knock politely, it sometimes begs for help. After that night, every storm felt different. The thunder didn't sound protective anymore. It sounded like footsteps coming closer through the rain. Both nights taught the same lesson. The world doesn't warn you when something evil is near. It just hides it behind the noise of normal life, the rustle of a bush, the cry for help, the pounding of rain. And sometimes, by the time you realize what you're hearing, it's already standing right behind you. When I was a kid, I used to think that a parent's voice was the safest sound in the world. It meant you were wanted, that you weren't alone. But when I was 7 years old, that same familiar voice almost pulled me into something I still can't explain. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of lazy day when cartoons played too loud and the smell of lunch still lingered in the air. My mum was upstairs cleaning, or at least I thought she was. I was in the living room, lying on the carpet with my eyes glued to the TV, when I heard her voice call my name. It came from the basement. At first, I didn't even look away from the screen. I yelled back, "What?" the way kids do when they don't want to move. No answer. A few seconds later, she called again, louder this time, stretching my name out in a way that didn't sound quite right. It wasn't angry or sweet, just hollow, like it was echoing from inside a tunnel. I paused the show and got up. The basement light wasn't on, so I called down the stairs again. "Mum?" Silence. The air down there felt colder, thicker. Halfway down, I stopped and peered into the dark. The shape of the laundry machine barely visible in the shadows. The hum of the refrigerator upstairs suddenly felt too far away. I turned back to go up, but then she called me again. "Come down here." It was unmistakably her voice, same tone, same rhythm. But something in me froze. My body screamed no, even as my brain tried to make sense of it. I turned on the stairwell light, but the switch clicked uselessly. The bulb had burned out. That's when I felt it, the sense that someone was standing just beyond the bottom step, waiting. I ran. My feet barely touched the stairs as I scrambled up. By the time I reached the hallway, tears were already blurring my eyes. My mum appeared from upstairs, rushing toward me, asking what was wrong. I stammered that she'd been calling me from the basement. Her face drained of color as she said she hadn't been downstairs all day. She went to check anyway. I waited at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing like it could protect me. When she came back up, she tried to smile, said there was nothing there, but I could see in her eyes that she was forcing herself to believe it. That night, I slept in her room. Every creak of the house sounded like someone calling my name. For years afterward, I avoided basements. Even now, as an adult, if I hear someone call me from another room, I hesitate before answering. Because sometimes what calls to you isn't asking you to come, it's asking you to join it. My grandfather told me his story long after mine happened, maybe because he knew I'd understand. He lived on a small farm 2 hours away from us, a quiet stretch of land surrounded by woods. He was the kind of man who believed in being prepared, always carried a pocket knife, always locked his doors, always kept pepper spray in his coat. But that didn't stop what happened one evening during his walk with his dog, Sherry. It was around sunset, that strange time of day when the sky turns gold and grey all at once. Sherry, a tiny Boston Terrier, was trotting happily beside him along the dirt path that lined the woods. They took that trail every day, morning and evening. He liked the solitude. Said it helped him think. As they walked, he saw another, the figure coming from the opposite direction, a man with a hood pulled low over his face. My grandfather nodded politely, said hello. The man didn't respond, just kept walking, head slightly turned toward the trees. Sherry barked at him, her little body tense, the fur on her back rising. Grandpa tugged her leash and scolded her gently, but she wouldn't stop looking back. Every few seconds, she'd twist around and bark again. He finally turned to see what had her so worked up. That's when he noticed it. The hooded man was now standing behind a tree, about 50 feet back, half hidden, watching. The sun was dipping lower, turning the woods into long strips of shadow. Grandpa kept walking, faster this time. He could hear the crunch of leaves behind him, slow, deliberate steps keeping pace. When the footsteps suddenly stopped, he almost convinced himself he'd imagined them. But then came the sound of leaves shifting close, too close. Before he could turn, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth and nose. The air cut off. His knees went weak. He could hear Sherry's furious barking, her growls turning into high-pitched yelps as she bit and clawed at the man's leg. Grandpa struggled, clawing at the hand holding him. His fingers found the cold metal of the pepper spray canister in his pocket. He twisted his arm, just enough to press the trigger. A hiss filled the air, followed by the man's scream. The grip on his face loosened, and he fell forward onto the path. The attacker stumbled away, hands covering his eyes, gasping for air. Grandpa didn't look back. He ran, as much as his old legs would let him, until the farmhouse lights came into view. When he told me the story, he still had that calm, matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. But I could tell that night never left him. He said what scared him most wasn't the attack itself, it was how quietly the man had moved, how he had followed them in complete silence until the last second. The sheriff said they never found the man, though a few farms down someone reported a stranger hiding near their barn later that week. Grandpa started carrying a flashlight and a whistle after that, and Sherry, small as she was, never let him walk alone again. It's strange how both our stories, the voice in the basement and the man in the woods, ended with the same feeling. Not relief, not safety, but the sense that something unseen had noticed us. As if the dark keeps track of who looks into it. Sometimes the things that try to lure you closer aren't the ones you can see. Sometimes they just sound like someone you love. When you're young, curiosity feels harmless. It's what pushes you to peek through fences, test locked doors, explore places adults whisper about. But sometimes curiosity doesn't just reveal secrets, it uncovers horror. When I was 12, my best friend Stevie and I loved exploring abandoned houses. We lived in a neighborhood that wasn't the best, the kind where broken windows and overgrown yards weren't unusual. There was one house everyone avoided, a place said to be cursed, empty for years. The front windows were covered by torn curtains, and the porch sagged like it had been waiting to collapse. One night, with our bikes and flashlights, we decided to see for ourselves what was inside. We parked our bikes behind a bush and crept up to the window. Stevie pointed, whispering. Look, behind the glass, between the curtains, was a face, pale, motionless, eyes staring straight ahead. We froze. After a few seconds, Stevie laughed weakly. It's fake, he said, like a Halloween head. He wanted to prove it. The back door, surprisingly, was unlocked. That should have been our first warning. Inside smelled of dust and something else thick and metallic, like rust. We made our way to the living room. The head was sitting on the windowsill. I picked it up. It was heavy, cold, and for a second, I thought the rubber felt strange, too soft, too real. Then it slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. A dark liquid dripped out, spreading across the dusty floorboards, blood, thick and unmistakable. Stevie's flashlight trembled in his hand. It's real? He whispered. It's a real head. Before we could move, a sound came from above us, a slow creak in the ceiling, footsteps shifting. Someone was upstairs. We bolted, the wooden floor groaning under our shoes. Out the back door, through the yard, onto our bikes, we didn't stop pedaling until the house was a blur behind us. Later, The police found the place. They confirmed it was a real human head belonging to a gang victim. They said it had been left there as a message. What message? No one knew. Stevie and I didn't care to find out. For years after, whenever I passed that street, I could still picture the eyes in the window, watching, waiting for someone new to come close enough to see. Sometimes evil doesn't wait for you to find it. Sometimes it knocks on your front door. It happened to my mum late one night, just after dinner. We live far from the city, surrounded by open fields and quiet roads, so when a man knocked on our door at 9 p.m., it was already strange. He wore a neat shirt and carried a plastic container. He smiled wide and said he was starting a new business selling American-made cleaning products. My mum, polite as always, opened the screen door. He handed her a Clorox sample and said he'd grab his vacuum cleaner from his van to show how it worked. When he opened the van, the porch light caught something that made my mother's heart stop 5 other men sitting inside, watching. None of them moved, none smiled. My mum threw the container back at him and yelled for me to grab my phone, but I couldn't find it. So I grabbed the kitchen knife instead and stood at the hallway corner. She shouted for them to get off our property, that she was calling the police. The man's smile faltered, then he turned and hurried to the van. The tires screeched as they sped off into the night. We never saw them again. The police said similar incidents had been reported, groups posing as door-to-door salesmen, targeting rural homes. The idea that they had planned to step inside, maybe take us, maybe worse, made our stomachs turn. My mother never opened the door to strangers again, neither did I. The next morning, that plastic container was still lying in the yard, half crushed, rainwater pooling inside it like an open eye. Years later, when I was older, I thought I'd seen enough to know how to stay safe. I was wrong. I found a listing online for a used ping pong table. The guy selling it lived about 20 minutes away. His messages were polite, normal. We agreed that I'd pick it up that evening. His house looked ordinary suburban, lights on, curtains drawn. I texted him that I was outside, and he opened the door almost immediately. His voice was rough, raspy, the kind that came from years of cigarettes. "Follow me," he said. "It's in the basement." The air inside smelled strange, not bad, but heavy like stale fabric and smoke. The basement was dimly lit, one weak bulb swaying slightly from the ceiling. There it was, right in the middle of the room, a full-size ping pong table. "I'll go find the paddles," he said, and walked back upstairs. His footsteps faded. I waited. Minutes passed, 10 of them. The silence grew sharp. I started to wander, trying to distract myself. There were framed photos on a shelf, all of him, no one else. Him at a park, him at a diner, him smiling awkwardly at the camera, always alone. That should have been enough to make me leave, but I didn't. At the back of the basement was a storage room. Inside, a desk. The top drawer was half open. I pulled it the rest of the way. Inside were Polaroid, photos grainy, yellowed. They showed a young woman tied to a chair, tape over her mouth, her eyes wide, pleading. My breath caught. Next to the photos were manila folders labeled A to Z. I didn't dare open them. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone to take a picture, to send to someone, anyone. No service. That's when I heard the click of a lock. I ran to the stairs. The door at the top wouldn't budge. His voice came from the other side, deep and calm. "Sorry, it locked accidentally. Let me get the key." No. My hands scrambled through the drawers for anything useful, tools, screwdrivers, anything that could force the lock. I jammed the smallest one into the keyhole and twisted until I heard the faintest click. The door opened just enough. I ran through it and out into the night. I didn't look back. At the police station, I showed them the photos. The next day, they told me what they'd found. The man was part of a child exploitation network operating through the dark web. Those folders contained records, victims, people who never walked out of that basement. I drove past that street once more after it was over. The house was dark, windows boarded, police tape fluttering like old skin in the wind. The quiet suburban block looked the same as ever. But I knew better now. Evil doesn't always hide in haunted houses. Sometimes it hides in the ordinary ones, the ones with clean driveways and trimmed lawns. Curiosity, courtesy, trust, The three things that let danger walk right through our doors. And the scariest part, each of these people thought they were safe until the last second. I used to love the snow. The silence of it, how it swallowed every sound and made the world feel clean. That was before I learned that silence doesn't mean safety, it just means you can't hear what's coming. My friend Hugh and I had driven 3 hours north for a weekend of backcountry skiing. We wanted isolation, untouched, slopes, adventure. We parked the truck at the base of the mountain and hiked a 1/4 mile to set up camp, a small tent between trees, a clearing that looked like paradise under the pale sky. By the time we finished setting up, dusk was creeping in, turning the snow blue. The first day went perfectly, the second didn't. We were skiing down one of the steeper hills when I lost sight of Hugh. He was ahead of me, his red jacket flashing between the trees. Then it disappeared. I waited at the bottom, calling his name into the wind. No answer. I tried the walkie-talkie, only static. As I started back toward the hill, a man appeared from the trees. His ski mask covered everything but his mouth. He spoke cheerfully, asking about the best runs, where we'd set up camp. His backpack was bright orange, and strapped to it were skis identical to Hugh's. He said his wife was looking for a campsite nearby, and asked if I could lead him to mine. My gut told me to refuse, but politeness or fear made me agree. We started walking. I tried the walkie again, static hissing. The stranger kept pace behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing. When we reached my tent, I turned and smiled awkwardly, realizing the mask made it useless.
Talk about what happened.
"Where's your wife?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just kept walking toward me. That's when I noticed the tear in the sleeve of his jacket, the same one Hugh had torn that morning when he slipped on a branch. My stomach dropped. "Who are you?" I said. He lunged. I fell backward into the tent, scrambling for the flare gun in my bag. Pain ripped through my leg, a knife, deep and fast. I fired blindly. The red flare hissed through the air, lighting the trees in a sudden bloom of crimson. The man staggered back, his face still hidden. He turned and ran into the woods, leaving me bleeding and shaking. When the rescue team finally arrived hours later, they found Hugh lying in the snow near the bottom of the hill, barely alive. He'd been stabbed twice, just like me. His backpack was gone. The mountains were quiet again after they took us away. Too quiet. I haven't gone skiing since. Snow doesn't feel pure anymore, it feels like a shroud. The next story belongs to someone else, but it fits the same truth. Danger doesn't always come from the wild. Sometimes it follows you home. It was a weeknight in a small college town. I was sitting on my porch, smoking a cigarette, pretending to study. The night was calm, the bars downtown were closing, and I could hear laughter drifting from a few blocks away. Then I saw her, my neighbor from the apartment next door. I didn't know her name, only that she always smiled politely when we passed in the hall. She was walking home alone, her steps uneven, her keys jingling softly. She got to her door and was fumbling with the lock when a man appeared from the shadows. He said something to her, too low for me to hear. She turned and smiled awkwardly, probably thinking he lived nearby. But he didn't leave. He kept talking, leaning in. The way his body angled toward hers made my stomach twist. I stayed where I was, pretending to read, but watching every move. His hand reached out, brushing her hair, slow and deliberate. She laughed nervously, stepping back. He stepped forward. I coughed loudly and slammed my textbook shut. The sound echoed. He froze, glanced at me, then muttered something and walked away too quickly, like a rat caught in the light. She thanked me later. Said he'd been asking strange questions, wouldn't leave, claimed he was a cab driver offering her a ride. A week later, police showed us a sketch. It was the same man. He'd been following women home from bars, attacking them after they got into his fake taxi. She was lucky, we both were. Now, whenever I walk past that same spot at night, I still imagine him there standing just outside the porch light, smiling that practiced, harmless smile. The last story happened when I was 14, babysitting for a family I didn't know well. The parents were kind but strange, too polite, too eager to leave. Before they went out, the mother said, "If Cody talks to himself, don't worry, he has an imaginary friend." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her name's Agnes. The rain started soon after they left. Cody sat on the carpet, playing with a collection of old toys. I watched TV, half bored, half listening to the patter of rain against the windows. Every few minutes, he'd say something softly, then pause, like he was waiting for a reply. Once, he laughed at something no one else could hear. One of the toys, a little crank box with spinning colors, started moving on its own. The handle twisted slowly, the screen lighting up. I frowned. "How's that working?" I asked. Cody looked up, dead serious. "Agnes is playing with it." I turned it off and tried to shake off the unease. Hours passed. When I finally went to the bathroom to wash up before his parents came home, someone knocked softly on the door. "Cody?" No answer. I opened it. The hallway was empty. Then, from the far end of the hall, one of the bedroom doors creaked open inch by inch. My voice shook. "Cody?" No reply. The light flickered once. I stepped closer, every hair on my body standing. Inside the room, Cody sat on the bed, staring at the wall. "Who opened the door?" I whispered. He turned his head slowly toward me, eyes wide but calm. "Agnes did," he said. I grabbed him, carried him to the living room, and sat there until his parents came home. They asked how everything went, and I lied, said fine. They called me a few weeks later, offering more work. I never answered. Sometimes, late at night, I remember his voice, how certain he sounded when he said her name, Agnes. A name that shouldn't mean anything. But it still makes the air feel colder when I say it out loud. 3 different people, 3 different nights, but one same truth. Evil wears a human face. It smiles, it talks, it pretends to love. Sometimes it hides behind masks or shadows, sometimes behind the voice of a friend. But it always wants one thing: to be invited in, and the moment you do, it never really leaves. The stories you've heard tonight weren't about ghosts, not really. They were about something much worse: people. The kind that lurk in the quiet corners of your life, hiding behind normal faces, polite smiles, and soft voices. Monsters that walk among us, waiting for the moment you forget to lock a door, second-guess your instincts, or follow a familiar voice into the dark. 10 stories, 10 different places, but one shared truth. Horror doesn't live only in haunted houses or cursed woods. It lives next door. It walks behind you at night. It stares through your window when you think no one's there. Sometimes it even borrows the voice of someone you love. Each person in these stories made the same mistake. They trusted the ordinary. A calm street, a kind stranger, a child's laughter. But evil hides best where it looks harmless. That's what makes it human. If you ever find yourself in a situation that feels wrong, don't rationalize it. The moment your stomach tightens, when your body whispers run, listen to it. Lock the door. Turn on the lights. Call someone. Scream if you have to. The people who survived these stories did so because they acted, even when their minds told them they were overreacting. When the man followed the boy to his girlfriend's house, instinct made him run. When the storm raged and someone begged to be let in, caution saved a family's life. When a child heard his mother's voice from the basement, fear kept him from taking one more step. Sometimes, survival depends not on bravery, but on doubt, the kind that makes you pause before opening a door. And then, there's the other kind of horror, the quiet, creeping kind. The babysitter who realized the imaginary friend was real. The skier who found his friend's clothes on a stranger. The man trapped in a basement surrounded by trophies of the dead. These aren't stories to make you afraid of the dark. They're reminders that danger thrives in the comfort of what we think we know. The next time you walk home at night and hear footsteps behind you, don't assume it's nothing. The next time someone knocks on your door, asking for help, look twice. The next time you hear your name whispered from another room, make sure the person calling you is real. We tell these stories not to spread fear, but awareness. Because fear, when you understand it, becomes a shield. This world isn't kind to the unwatchful. But if you keep your eyes open, if you trust that quiet voice inside you that says something isn't right, you'll stay one step ahead of whatever's waiting in the dark. And remember, the shadows aren't empty. They're listening.